Hello and welcome back to Big Nostalgia, the podcast where we look at the games from our childhood, where they came from, the story of their development, and the story within the game itself. We then talk about the audio and visual design, and if we like it, does it hold up? We also discuss a game's legacy. Is it well remembered? Did it spawn a million sequels? Or is it an obscure title that we hear little about nowadays? As usual, I am joined by Phill.
Hello.
And we're also joined by Vicky.
Hello.
To start our season on Game Boy games, we are talking about the one which came packaged with the console, the legend itself, Tetris.
So, for once, we are starting a season with a console's actual launch title.
That's not very common of us at all, really, is it? Actually starting with a launch title.
No, we started our second season on N64 games with an N64 launch title. We got there eventually.
Oh, we did, with Mario 64, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
So, for once,
Super Mario 64.
actually the first and second episodes of this season are launch titles of the Game Boy. It's
Hooray!
Almost as if we planned it.
Almost.
Doubt.
So if you've watched this series before, you'll know the things we like to cover. But if you know Tetris, you'll know that the game has no story, no bosses, no protagonist, just falling blocks. But this game is still such an interesting piece of video game history, so I hope it'll make a good episode anyway. Usually, we kick things off by saying the release date of the game, and whilst Tetris was released on the Game Boy in Japan on the 14th of June 1989, in North America on the 31st of July 1989, and in the PAL regions on the 28th of September 1990, the story starts far earlier than that. So, Tetris was created by Alexey Pajitnov in 1985, whilst Pajitnov lived in the Soviet Union. Pajitnov was inspired to create the game by Pentaminos. There's going to be a lot of words I mispronounce this episode. I'm not going to redo every line. Pentaminos is a puzzle board game about arranging different blocks. So, unlike Tetris, which has 4 blocks, Pentaminos were made of 5 blocks, with penta being Greek for 5, whilst the name Tetris comes from tetra, the Greek word for 4, combined with Pajitnov's favourite sport, which was tennis. So, tetra, tennis, Tetris. At the time, Pajitnov was working for the Soviet Academy of Sciences in Moscow, Russia, where he'd worked since 1977 when he was just a 22-year-old intern. Due to the ongoing Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, there was a limit on the fastest computing power, and certain technologies couldn't go into the Soviet Union. So the original game was actually programmed on what was called the Electronica 60 computer, in such a basic way that each Tetris block was made of square brackets. So one Tetris block was 8 square brackets arranged as a Tetris piece. But there were no graphics, which also meant no sound. Pajitnov apparently knew that the game was going to be a hit success anyway, because he couldn't stop playing it himself.
I do find it incredible if you think of how far computers and especially computer games have come. I think sometimes we forget, even with like indie games and like certain games that are designed old school, you still forget how far technology has come to be able to develop games the way they do these days. It just wasn't a thing back then. And it hasn't been that long a time if you really think about it.
I think one of the things that's kind of been lost in modern games is that because they no longer have to fit it on a disc or a cart, like the file sizes just get ridiculous. I know, like, especially some PlayStation downloads, like, what, you have to start it the night before if you wanna play it?
Oh, like 12 hours. 72 hours. It's like ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, ludicrous. I like the simplicity of those old games as well. Like, I think working to a limitation is always like,
It forces you to be creative, doesn't it? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like, ultimately, one of the reasons Tetris is only 4 blocks is because
Well, if you think of it like Pong,
it was simpler. You know, you can there's 7 orientations of Tetris blocks, and there is 18 orientations of 5 blocks. So it makes the game far more easier both to program and to play.
I'm just looking on the App Store, and even to this day, Tetris is still only 350 megabytes, which I think is pretty tiny in today's.
And that's with music, graphics,
tiny.
scoring, online capabilities.
I was going to say probably in-app purchases.
Yeah, probably.
And if you think about other games that are out at that certain time, like Pong, like Tetris just brought a whole different level, literally a whole different sort of ball game to the genre. If you think of all the games that have been inspired by it, but I think I'm rushing ahead of Phil's
Russian ahead.
Tetris.
Rushing ahead.
Russian ahead. Boo.
So the early game, interestingly, didn't have the first version of the game you made didn't have the falling blocks. It was just arranging blocks.
Or the in-app purchases.
Or no, the in-app purchases came way later. Because that's how Pentaminoes works. You take the blocks and you have to arrange them into a square. It's a puzzle ultimately. But he said like with the four blocks pieces, he said it became like really simple to solve. Whereas obviously the falling blocks and the disappearing lines keeps that constant pressure on you to keep like focusing on it.
I also think it brings in a certain element for like harder games and easier games because it's literally again, very simple, literally the speed of the blocks and how many blocks you've got in to like maneuver around.
So anyway, in order to make Tetris easier to share, Pajitnov enlisted the help of colleagues Pavlovsky and Gerasimov, with whom he worked on games with after work. They all worked at the same place, and after work they would stay to use the machines to make their own games. So Gerasimov helped port the game to an IBM computer, which added colour, a scoring system, and a level system. And IBM computers were much more prevalent outside of Russia as well, so it was a way to help share the game even further. Unfortunately, when they inquired about selling the game, it was technically classified as government property because it'd been developed on a government machine on government time.
Eek.
That's just wild.
So the distribution was largely unofficial. Because at this time, because of the Cold War and the Communist Party in Russia, intellectual property rights were not granted. And because of this was developed on company time, these rights were held by the state. The idea of selling software at all for personal profit was extremely limited as well. So, in the early days then, Tetris was getting shared around just by people making copies and sharing it. And it went all around Russia, but it still was in Russia. It was only when one of Pajitnov's boss had business in Hungary, and he took it to Hungary and shared it with a colleague there, that people started copying it in Hungary and they started porting it to other machines. And that's how Tetris even left Russia in the first place. Because if it never left Russia, it was never going to go anywhere.
Imagine if it hadn't left Russia.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you'd think that maybe it would have turned up much later, once, after...
It would have turned up eventually.
In that sweet spot. Yeah, there's that sweet spot when the Russians aren't baddies, and then... and then they're baddies again. You know, there's a little there's a slice in the middle.
But I feel it would have been too late, wouldn't it? Because it's set for the history of Tetris, it would have been too late.
It definitely wouldn't have made the impact.
It came out when it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because obviously, like, simple games can still make a big impact whenever they come out. If you remember, like, Flappy Bird, when that came out. And, like, the developer of that actually took it off sale because people were getting too obsessed.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going down a bit of a aside there. So,
we never go down tangents in this show.
No. So anyway, the rights at the moment were held by the state-run Elektronorgtechnika, which we'll be calling ELOG for short. And they were in charge of any licensing or software distribution outside of the USSR, because that's what they did for all Russian software. But in Hungary, where the game had become popular, students had ported it both to the Commodore 64 and to Apple II computers. And this is how the game came to the attention of a man called Robert Stein, who worked for Andromeda Software. So he was from Hungary originally and used to spend his time in Hungary looking for software to develop in the West, to license to the West, and then he would take a cut of the royalties. That was his business model, basically.
Smart.
It was one of the times he was over there, he saw someone playing Tetris and, like, wanted to license it because he saw it was a good game. But then they said, well, you'd have to contact the Russians for that. So initially he contacted the Soviet Academy of Sciences, but his first contacts were ignored. Then he managed to reach out to Pajitnov himself and asked him if he could help with it. So Pajitnov and his supervisor at work, they didn't know much about this, but they responded to a fax from Stein saying, yeah, we're interested in doing this with you. Not realising that in the West, a written fax basically stating your interest is a legal document.
Right.
So at that point, they'd kind of implicitly given, without realising, given their permission for Stein to go and find developers in the West to start developing a licensed version of Tetris. So Stein then goes, bear in mind, he's not actually got the rights at this point. He's just got a piece of paper that says Pajitnov is interested. He goes and he sells the licensing rights to the UK company Microsoft, which UK followers of the podcast may be interested to know also ran the Daily Mirror at that point, which is where the name comes from.
Wild.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the licensing rights for Europe went to Microsoft, and there was a company called Spectrum Holobyte, which was kind of the United States companion to Microsoft, which had the rights for the USA. And they produced PC versions, both successful in both regions. So Stein didn't technically have the rights, though. And it was already being sold. So he went back to Russia to secure the rights, and he was redirected to Elog, who technically had the rights, who had come to Pajitnov and his supervisor and said, you don't have the authority to negotiate this. And so confusion ensued, but Stein was able to deal with Elog, and in the end, he secured a 10-year licensing deal for Tetris on computer systems. So the phrase computer systems will actually be quite an important part of this story. So now, with all that out of the way, we're finally getting ready to talk about what this episode is about, which is the Game Boy version of Tetris. But you can't tell that story without knowing that preamble. So there's a man called Hank Rogers from a company called Bulletproof Software. Rogers discovered the game at a Las Vegas gaming convention because he licensed games in Japan. So he found Tetris on one of the stands and he fell in love with it. He wanted to get the Japanese rights, but the worldwide arcade rights were with Atari, who had purchased them from Stein. And then Atari had licensed the Japanese arcade rights to Sega, who then licensed the console rights in Japan to Hank Rogers and Bulletproof Software. So, just so we're all clear, Stein had a 10-year deal for computer systems.
Yeah.
He licensed arcade rights to Atari. Atari licensed Japanese arcade rights to Sega. And Sega licensed console rights to Hank Rogers.
Oh, good lord.
So none of them had the rights then?
No, Stein had the rights for computer systems. And in his perception, that meant consoles, arcades, because they were computers, in a sense.
You know, those details you see on packets now, and you know someone has put, like, I don't know, something metal in a microwave. He's a reason there's so much legal jargon now on the definition of what a computer system is.
Yeah. Well, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, as it turned out, Hank Rogers knew people at Nintendo who were very interested in Tetris. Like, Shigeru Miyamoto loved Tetris. Hank Rogers was a friend of Hiroshi Yamauchi, who was the president of Nintendo. And as a result, Rogers was able to convince Nintendo to make Tetris the pack-in title for the Game Boy. But that would require Rogers and Nintendo getting the handheld rights, which up to this point had not been discussed by anyone. So Rogers went to Stein about getting the handheld rights, and Stein said, oh yeah, I'll get back to you. And he was acting suspiciously about it. So Rogers, in a completely reasonable move, decided to go straight to the Soviet Union to ask him about it in person. On a tourist visa.
Oh, God lord.
So, technically illegally,
Balls on him.
he went as a tourist to Russia. He went to the Elog headquarters and just asked to speak to somebody about the rights to Tetris.
Good lord.
The balls he had on him in the middle of a Cold War, just to walk up to the Soviet Union and be like, hey, I want to talk about this. I know I'm not here on a works visa or anything like that. I'm just on a tourist. But hey, you'll talk about it, right?
So, at the same time, Microsoft
Yeah.
had also become interested in the handheld rights, and they had also asked Stein, and Stein was being equally evasive of them. So, Microsoft had also gone to Russia.
Oh, God.
And so had Stein. So as it
Oh,
transpired,
goodness.
all three of these interested parties were in Russia at the same time to try and get the handheld rights to Tetris.
Did Stein originally think he had that then because he thought handheld counted as a computer system?
I think a handheld, I think he had gone back because I think he'd maybe realised that was maybe a stretch.
Yeah.
Like, you can argue, because at the time, you remember all computers had external monitors, i.e.
okay.
you could argue like a TV and a console was like a computer.
Oh, right, okay.
Something with a built-in handheld becomes a lot harder to defend.
Yeah, okay.
No. Like, and they were all very basic. Like, you're talking like the original Game & Watch games, which were just one kind of LED kind of game.
Yeah.
Like, it was not like the Game Boy. So anyway, in Russia, we had Hank Rogers there on behalf of Nintendo. Stein was there, and a man called Kevin Maxwell was there on behalf of Microsoft. All unknown to each other, and all looking for the same thing. So Rogers walks into Elog, where he meets the Elog CEO called Nikolai Belikov. And Belikov, understandably, is quite confused about the whole thing, because he was under the impression that they just licensed computer rights, and there was someone here asking about handheld rights. But either way, Rogers is able to negotiate for handheld rights for Tetris with the Russians. Also in the room is Alexey Pajitnov, and it helped that Hank Rogers and Pajitnov were very fast friends. They liked the same games, they got along really well, so as a result, he was kind of favoured in that negotiation. A spanner was thrown in the works when Hank Rogers presented a copy of the Famicom, which is the Japanese Nintendo Entertainment System, a Famicom version of Tetris. And the Russians are very confused because, as far as they're concerned, they've not licensed any console versions of Tetris. So they accuse him of piracy and, like, illegally selling it. And once he takes them through the route on which he licensed the game, he asks the Russians to show him the agreement they signed with Stein, and he points out where the interpretation had happened.
Right.
So as it turns out, Stein is already in Russia, looking for the handheld rights. But Stein has not been paying any royalties to the Russians up to this point either. So the Russians go in, quite smart. They decide basically to play these guys at their own game. They go in and very angrily say to Stein that he's not been paying the royalties and therefore he's got to sign a new contract, and hands them this long contract with lots of wording about late payment fees, how much money to expect and things like that. But also hidden in there is a redefinition of what a computer system is.
Right.
Boom.
A computer has a
Yes.
screen, a mouse and a keyboard.
Oh, smart.
So Stein goes away, he reads the document, but he doesn't pick this up. He thinks it's all just about money.
Yeah.
And he signs it because he really wants the handheld rights.
Yeah.
In signing it, technically, Stein loses all rights except for computer.
Oof.
So this new explicit description has kind of cut off a lot of people. So at this time, basically, because Rogers had just made this deal, he contacted Nintendo and said, you know, I've just heard the console rights to Tetris are now available. And they said, that's impossible because we heard that, you know, Atari have them, Sega have them. And actually, it was such a secretive thing that the head of Nintendo of America told his employees he was going to Japan so that Atari wouldn't learn that he was actually flying to Russia. And they went over there and not only secured the rights for handheld, they also got worldwide rights for console.
Wow.
So
Slam dunk.
yeah, they had managed to come out winning on top of all of this. And then immediately they sent over a cease and desist to Atari to stop doing stuff with Tetris because they didn't own the rights.
Wow.
Which Atari
must have been pissed.
Well, they were more confused at first because
They hadn't even licensed it from them directly. They'd licensed it from someone else, right?
and they hadn't realised that the person who they'd licensed it off didn't have the right to license it to them. So
yeah, no, I would have been pissed.
they did take them to court, but they found in Nintendo's favour because of the revised wording of what computer system is. And eventually, Atari said they were going to appeal. They dropped it. All of the Atari copies of Tetris ended up destroyed, aside from a handful that had already sold. So actually, I think an Atari version of NES Tetris is like quite rare nowadays. Like it goes for quite a lot of money on eBay. Wow. Anyway, the Game Boy version obviously was then clear for release as a pack-in title for the Game Boy, releasing in 1989. So a lot of that story is actually about other versions of Tetris. You can't tell the story of the Game Boy version without covering all those bits. And there's also a lot of bits that I wasn't able to go into more detail with. If anyone listening really wants to get like a full in-depth version of the story, there's a channel called The Gaming Historian that has like an hour-long video that goes through it in a lot more depth than I've been able to do here.
That's crazy, though, the amount of history that came behind the Tetris game.
Yeah.
Imagine just creating a game where blocks fall down.
Yeah, literally blocks fall down. That's all that majorly happens. But how much drama was behind the scenes to even make it a game?
And you've got the biggest heads of the biggest companies in the world just clamouring literally at your door to just get the rights to it.
And you've also, it feels like a bad joke, Steins, that other guy, and one more guy walk into a Russian embassy who walks out alive.
In the middle of the Cold War as well.
In the middle of the Cold War?
Yeah, so...
Bloody hell.
And just before I move on to like the design and things like that, an important footnote is that because it was owned by the government, the actual creator of the game, Alexey Pajitnov, actually got no money from Tetris until the 1990s, when the USSR fell and the licensing deals all expired. At which point, Hank Rogers helped him to acquire all the rights to Tetris as they expired and form the Tetris Company. So that was in 1996. So that was almost... Well, that was like... when the game was actually made, it was over 10 years from when he first created Tetris to actually receiving any money from it.
But it's a happy ending. Like, I thought you were going to say, like, and he still hasn't had any money to this day. Like... So I'm glad Hank Rogers was able to help him do that, and they were able to, because there's nothing worse than a creator not actually getting any of, the rights or the royalties to what they create.
Yeah, and like after the fall of the Soviet Union, E-Log became a private company, and Pajitnov and Rogers just bought it outright so that they could have all the rights under one place, which is how it is today.
There you go. Wow.
Pajitnov now lives in the United States. He moved there again in the early 90s with the help of Rogers to pursue a career as a video game developer.
Love that.
Yeah.
So, let's talk a bit more about actual Tetris then. What there is to talk about. So, before I said how many Tetris pieces there were, can one of you remember what I said?
6.
Close.
7.
8.
7 is the right answer. And then I could see you counting them on your hand, Nick. Between you, can you give me the 7 letters that make up the Tetris pieces?
That one. That one. This isn't very good for an audio medium, is it?
So that's an L and a J, an I and an O.
The square.
An I and an O.
An
S.
Square is O.
O is the square.
What's
S and a Z.
S and a Z.
It has to be another
T.
double then.
And T, that's it. You got 7.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's, the T block, S, Z, the square or the O, the line or the I, the L and the J.
And there's actually a hidden word in that because it spells out Tzirros.
That's it. The actual secret of Tetris, yeah. That should have been the name of the game,
Yeah, that is such a catchy name.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is Tetris standards now. Like every version of Tetris is 10 columns wide. And apparently that's because even if you go as far as 13 columns wide, the game actually becomes incredibly easy because there's too much room for you to operate in.
Right, yeah.
So 10 is kind of an essential point of like, compared to the width of the pieces to actually create that environment of pressure. So as I say, the very first version had no music, no scoring system, no level system. But now it's got all of those things. I'll go into like different versions of Tetris a bit later on, but it's kind of obviously come a long way since then. According to a Q&A, the original version of Tetris, I think it's a Ars Technica video. It's one of the ones in the description. But they asked Pajitnov how many lines of code it took to make Tetris, and he said somewhere between 7 and 800.
Whoa.
What?
So that's a lot, but not that much for all things considered.
Still very wide.
The Game Boy game uses a random number generator to decide what piece to give you, but actually there's been some issues with that. So in the original version of Tetris that Pajitnov was making at home, he realised that the random number generator always started on the same number. So therefore, every game of Tetris always started with the same block.
Ah. Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah.
Not very good randomizer, is it?
It's not. The Game Boy version also had, not an error, but it also wasn't a truly random number generator, which Rogers picked up whilst he was playtesting, that eventually it would start to repeat.
All right.
And he said, I think he said something along the lines of like, unacceptable, the Russians wouldn't allow this. You got to change it. And he forced him to change it about,
Wow.
it was like one of the
Know your audience,
last
dude.
minute changes before it went to production. Like they started producing the carts.
I think that's a very good thing to do because, like, yeah, if you literally get to like the same thing, you just start repeating your technique, and that does change how like endless it is, really, doesn't it?
And this sort of game, being on arcades and stuff like that, it would have been played quite a lot. So if you were like a hardcore gamer of those times, you would work out the cheat, and it would be kind of like a cheat. You'd work it out quite quickly.
Well, it almost becomes like card counting in a casino, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
it's tough, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
The modern Tetris uses what's called the bag system, which is, at the beginning, all 7 pieces are put in a bag, and they're taken out one by one. So then when the bag is empty, it's full again. So that way, even though it's random, you know that it's at most 13 pieces until you get the next one again.
Right, okay, yeah.
So if you imagine like a physical bag which has all 7 in, and you're just taking them out one at a time, and then it automatically refills.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Tetris has some named moves and techniques. Do you know any?
The cha-cha slide.
No.
No.
So you've got the T-spin,
Right.
which is where you're lowering a T-piece into position, and last minute you rotate it to get it to fit in a gap.
Okay.
You've got the tuck, which is as it sounds. It's when you wait until it gets right near the bottom and then very quickly tuck it in.
Whoop.
You've got what's called burning or clearing garbage, when you're playing competitive Tetris and you just focus on getting rid of awkwardly made lines,
Okay.
rather than trying to go for 4 lines in a row.
Mhm.
Obviously, there is a technique of just keeping one column free on the right or left-hand side so that you can just keep going for a Tetris, because Tetris is also the word they use for 4 line clears at once.
Okay.
So it's a single, double, triple Tetris.
Wow.
Ah.
And then in more of the recent games, you've got what is called an O-spin, because in some of the games, like, the centre around which the pieces rotate is slightly different. So you wouldn't think that a square piece would rotate, but they can kind of use where the centre of rotation is to tuck the O into gaps as well.
Wow.
Ooh. And none of those are called the cha-cha slide.
None of them are called the cha-cha slide. Maybe you could discover the cha-cha slide. Invent your own Tetris technique.
Please, I would like to see that.
So, actually, we were talking about, obviously, strategy and things like that. It's actually been proven by university research that Tetris, there is no strategy to keep going indefinitely in Tetris because of its random nature.
Interesting.
I would love to be part of that research. That sounds like really, like, very... I feel like it sounds more interesting than it is, though.
It
'cause it'd be a
took
lot of
10
maths.
minutes.
I was playing Tetris and I couldn't work it out, so therefore...
Now that
Thesis
is a doctorate.
That was just on a lunch break.
So, the international release of Tetris, this was actually by Spectrum Holobyte first. They were looking how do you market Tetris, because at the time video games had protagonists and stories, but Tetris was just falling blocks. And it was actually them who came up with this initial idea of bigging up the Russianness of Tetris. Like, it was very much, the idea was, oh, you can see how they live in Russia.
What?
And therefore, yeah, so the NES and Game Boy versions of Tetris have lots of Russian imagery, Russian, like, points of interest and stuff as their backgrounds. And
The music's quite Russian as well, isn't it?
well, so the music is all... The Tetris theme is a Russian folk song.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
And it's now known as
that.
the Tetris theme.
Yeah. Da, 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 da. Oh.
But yeah, so it's called Korobeiniki, and the original version has lyrics, and it's actually a love song.
Oh.
So,
Aw.
from Wikipedia, this is some of the translated lyrics of Korobeiniki.
And Phil, you have to sing this.
I'm not going to sing it. I also don't know how it goes to the tune, so I think that would be a very poor choice. So it's, oh, my crate is so full. I've got both calico and brocade. Take pity, oh sweetie, of this lad's shoulder. I will, go out into the tall rye. I will wait there till the night comes. Once I see the black-eyed lass, I will showcase all my goods. I paid no small prices myself. Don't bargain, don't be stingy. Bring your scarlet lips here. Sit closer to the dear lad.
There's a bit in the middle there where it sounds like the origin story of Tetris.
Obviously, the Tetris theme is one of the most remixed video game themes of all time, because since the Tetris company took over, it has been a rule that every version of Tetris made has to include its theme. There were 2 other themes on the game. So the one I just spoke about is referred to as Type A in the NES and Game Boy. But there's Type B, which is actually an original composition created for Tetris, which I didn't realise until I was researching this video. I assumed it was all classical music, because Type C is based on an arranged version of French Suite No. 3 in B minor, BMV 814 Menuet by Johann Sebastian Bach.
Oh, there you go.
What?
Very, very catchy title.
So catchy.
The victory themes in the game are also from classical music. So that's based on Tripak from Tchaikovsky's ballet The Nutcracker.
Oh, really? There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pajitnov has said in interviews that when he goes to classical music concerts, people associate the music with Tetris, and he feels really embarrassed.
Oh.
Anyway, let's go on some Tetris quirks, which I've picked a handful because I'm sure I could have just kept finding them, because obviously Tetris is so prolific. The official Tetris website has its own list of fun facts about Tetris, of which I will read you a few now. So, Tetris was the first video game to ever make it into space, according to the Guinness World Records 2014 Gamers Edition. Professor X himself, Patrick Stewart, is a self-professed Tetris addict.
He's right generation, isn't he?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Bit like how Robin Williams was a Legend of Zelda fan. Sometimes it's just the right generation, and it's just people okay and being game nerds before it was cool.
So kind of as you were saying around being the right generation for Tetris, that kind of reminds me of a bit of the story that I was going to mention earlier, which is a supposed quote from Rogers to Nintendo, because Nintendo were going to package Super Mario Land, which we're also talking about this season, as the pack-in game. And supposedly the quote goes, if you put in Mario, all the little kids will buy it. If you put in Tetris, everyone will buy it. And that proved to be really true, because Tetris was popular, like, there are versions of Tetris which came with, like, a button which would switch you back to your work program so that people could play it during work hours and quickly hide it.
Okay.
Like, it was popular with working, it's popular across, like, all demographics, like, especially, like, working age people, and it really helped drive the sales of the Game Boy across, like, multiple types of people.
Well, if you think about gaming as a whole and the different sort of gamers you have out there, a lot of people think gaming is just for children. Especially in that generation of, obviously, there wasn't many game options out there. Whereas Tetris really hits that whole Nintendo ethos of people who can play at 5 to 50.
Yeah.
Because it's a very simple concept. It can be put on multiple ports. You don't have to. You don't really have to learn the instructions. Just the thing falling down, put it in the gaps. Like that's about it. So it was simple enough and broad enough. And I think sometimes modern day games get so centered to modern game players that we lose that aspect of anyone can pick it up.
Yeah.
Because Nintendo are seen as childish for doing that, but actually, if you think of a modern day Mario game, they have very easy levels and then incredibly difficult levels later on to hit those two markets. But obviously, they are quite family friendly as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. It all depends what you're looking for in a game.
It's like those games nowadays that's like, you have to get like 10 hours in, and it's like, no. I don't have the time to play something for
40 minutes of cutscenes before you enjoy yourself.
I do not care if it's a TV series or a book or a game. If I have to wait a certain amount of time to get into it, then I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
It needs to capture me in the first 10 seconds or it ain't happening.
So, who's ready for some more Tetris fun facts from the official Tetris website?
Me.
Tetrivia.
Tetrivia.
Oh,
I should have named this section that.
Yeah.
So, obviously,
missed opportunity.
Tetris has been mentioned a lot in pop culture. So, just to list some of the shows where it gets a mention includes The Simpsons, Family Guy, Futurama, Big Bang Theory, The Office, Muppet Babies.
What?
Yeah, apparently, according to the official Tetris website. A fully playable recreation of the 1984 version of the Tetris game was on display in New York City's Museum of Modern Art. The Tetris company presented the game as a gift to the museum in recognition of the Tetris game's achievement in interactive design.
Wow. What was it on?
So it was displayed as a work of art. A screen, I imagine.
Yeah. So old Mr. Computer writes probably another £1 in the pocket for that.
Yeah. It has also been projected on the side of a building as another one of its records.
That's fun.
So moving on from the official fun facts to the other stuff I was able to find, I'm going to talk about some Tetris sequels later on, but a definitely quirky version of Tetris was Tetris 64, which was only released in Japan and added a feature that measured the player's heart rate and sped up the game as their heart rate increased.
Excuse me.
Oh my god, no. Okay. That sounds terrible.
Could you stay calm and play Tetris?
Breathing through it like a maternity thing, but with Tetris going down the screen.
So, the game has proved so addictive that players have reported being able to see Tetris blocks in their sleep or when they're just out and about in the world, and this has become to be known as the Tetris effect. So, I'm going to give the Wikipedia definition so I don't mince words. The Tetris effect... I minced words straight away. The Tetris effect occurs when someone dedicates vast amounts of time, effort, and concentration to an activity which thereby alters their thoughts, dreams, and other experiences not directly linked to said activity. So it doesn't have to come from Tetris, but Tetris is where the condition got its name.
Oh, there you go.
Oh wow, because I've definitely done that. I've definitely done games and stuff like that too long, and then
you see it in the world.
100%.
Yeah.
Or heard it in your brain, just you're walking along, you just hear a bit of a Mario theme tune, or you accidentally punch a block and then you have to go to A&E, standard stuff.
Yeah.
It was actually, it used to be the jousting effect before the Tetris effect. It was just pretending you're running along a horse with a big stick.
Running along a horse, eh?
It was really difficult.
That was going so well.
That was going so well. You joust the way you joust, Nick. Don't let other people tell you how to joust.
No, but come on, that phrase must have there must have been a variation of that phrase, like ghost. I don't know, something before the Tetris effect.
Maybe something related to the bright colours in certain art or things like that. Obviously, it is part of that interactivity that is what makes it so gripping. And I suppose that was the early days of screens and video games and things.
And I suppose the colour palette as well would have been very eye-catching.
What about factory workers who are just doing muscle memory little spasms in their sleep and stuff like that? That must have been a thing before Tetris.
I'm sure.
I'd like to question that.
But maybe the Tetris one is specifically games.
I'm not sure it carried the same level of whimsy as being called the Tetris effect.
I'm cynical about that.
We do like whimsy.
But anyway, Tetris has been involved in a lot of research into understanding the way our minds work, especially with regards to the Tetris effect. So this in particular has been used by researchers to show evidence that our memories don't work like files on a computer. So there's different theories about how we store memories and access them. And this kind of goes against the idea that we store them like files that we have to look up, because this actually shows that memory is something far more active and dynamic in our brains, just based on the way that people were seeing the colours and obviously how that relates to their past experiences. Tetris has also been used in treating both post-traumatic stress disorder and addictions. Basically, you playing Tetris at key points in order to... I'm going to butcher this. The Wikipedia page has obviously all the links to the studies if you want to read directly. But as I understand it, it's you play Tetris at certain points and it creates that link to the game, to the negative experience or the addiction. And over time, you kind of increase the Tetris and it kind of helps to manage those symptoms, because some of your brain's concentration goes to the game, not to your brain doing its usual responses in those kinds of situations.
Interesting. Okay.
That's wild. If that you can use Tetris like that.
Yeah, it's been used in therapy quite successfully.
That's wild.
And both Henk Rogers and Alexey Pajitnov supposedly have had the Tetris effect from playing too much Tetris.
There you go.
Nah. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
So, when Tetris was all brought under the control of Pajitnov and Rogers, they had to standardise the game and its various different quirks across different versions, such as what we said before with the techniques and like whether you can how long you've got when a piece hits the bottom before it's stuck, and how long you've got to like move it left and right. They also had to come up with a standardised way to treat rotations, like we were talking about the O-spin. And it turns out with Tetris, they had to come up with 5 different types of rotation to classify all the different movements you can do within the game based on the conditions and how the position of the block affects how it will rotate. The first time Alexey Pajitnov was given the NES version of Tetris, he actually played it with the controller upside down because the D-pad had to be on the same side as the arrow keys for a keyboard. That's how he was used to playing. There is still a lively Tetris competitive scene, especially for the original NES version. So if you're interested in this, there is a YouTuber called Summoning Salt who's done a 2-hour video on the Tetris world record. Because Tetris, like a lot of puzzle games, doesn't technically end, but it does reach a point where it's so fast it's meant to just be the end.
Right, okay.
But it's called a kill screen. And this video goes into how people started playing the game so fast they could play on the insane speed of the kill screen. And I think the last that I saw when I was doing my research is somebody has managed to play Tetris for so long that they've gone all the way around back to level 1 again.
Wow.
And this includes certain things like the game glitching, like the colours just become corrupted.
Oh, really?
The game was not meant to be played for that long. Which includes some colour schemes where the blocks are black and grey and white. So half the blocks you can barely see. It's a really, really interesting video of how, like, they kept thinking, like, oh, a score of this is impossible. And then someone would, like, get that score. And, like, the different techniques they had to develop to actually play the game, to put in the number of inputs per second, so that they could even... Because the whole point of the kill screen is that it kills you. Like, playing regularly, you do not have the time to move a block to the far left or far right hand side before it hits the bottom. But what they do is the most recent method, is they have the controller upside down, and they basically have one finger always on the A button and always on the D-pad, and they're like doing like a drum beat on the back of the controller so that they can hit the D-pad more times than like you could hit it normally.
Right. In
order to play at like this like super speed. It's insane. I recommend the video to anyone who really wants to get lost for 2 hours watching people play Tetris.
Wow. Didn't
Are you going to put the link below?
All the links are in the description of the video.
Was there like a world famous Tetris player who died recently?
I'm not sure recently. I know that it was a few years ago,
yeah.
I think. Yeah, but there was. He was the world champion, I think, for 6-7 years.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
According to a BuzzFeed article I found on Quirks About Tetris, there is apparently Tetris fan fiction on fanfiction.net.
Excusez-moi?
And some of it is sexual.
Excusez-moi?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
The blocks.
I have not gone looking. I'm going to be honest with you. That is homework.
You
for the
haven't
class.
done your full research
come
then,
on
have you?
Phil. I bet it's something to do with, like, when there's, like, when you've just got that one little empty slot for just, like, an eyepiece. And it's 4 rows,
Ah, yeah.
It's writing itself, right, on the podcast.
There you go. You haven't done your full research, Philip. I'm disappointed in you.
And my last quirk that I thought to add in this video is that there was a Eurodance version of the Tetris theme produced in 1992 by record producer Nigel Wright alongside well-known composer Andrew Lloyd Webber,
Wow.
who, if you don't recognise, is the guy behind Cats, The Phantom of the Opera, and Jesus Christ Superstar.
Wow.
They released it under the pseudonym Dr. Spin.
Yeah.
And it sat in the UK top 50 for 8 weeks, peaking at 6th place in the music charts.
God, I love the UK music taste. Love it. Only in the UK, I swear, Tetris could get that high.
Yeah, well, it's just a very confusing set of circumstances and well-known names. Like, why is Andrew Lloyd Webber doing that?
Like, huh? And what? And
What?
how?
Yeah. So, Legacy. Well, how do you even do a Legacy segment on Tetris? It's Tetris. It's one of the best-selling video game franchises of all time.
Still going.
Well, supposedly 520 million copies sold across all its various entries and spin-offs.
That's a lot.
It's one of the most recognisable games of all time. So, Alexey Pajitnov went on to create actual sequels to Tetris. There was one that was called Welltris, which was 3D, and kind of the blocks were falling down the sides of like a well. So it was like 4 sides of a bottom. He made one that was called Hat-Tris, which was about putting the same type of hat on top of the same type of head.
Right.
And he made one that was called Faces-Tris,
For God's sake.
which was all about completing faces with falling blocks.
Obviously.
None of them had the same cut through as Tetris.
He needs to see a psychiatrist.
Hey.
Tetris has had a range of other entries over the years, including but not limited to Tetris Deluxe, Tetris 2, Puyo Puyo Tetris, Tetris Effect, named for the condition I mentioned earlier, Tetris Ultimate, Tetris Forever.
Tetris Begins. The Dark Tetris Rises.
Ultimate Tetris. Tetris 2. Tetris 2, the Block Awakening. Tetris 3, the Block's Revenge.
Tetris Revengeance.
Tetris versus Jason.
A notable standout of all of these is a relatively recent 2019 game called Tetris 99, which was included as a free part of Nintendo Switch Online, where the central gimmick was you play against 98 other players to be the last Tetris player standing.
Fun.
The NES and Game Boy versions of Tetris are already on Nintendo Switch Online as well, which had a trailer featuring Alexey Pajitnov himself making the announcement. There was a film in 2023 which focused on the development of Tetris called
And
Tetris.
thank God they got there before the weird, like, sort of shoehorned, tangential, like, weird drama or, like, I don't know.
There was a little bit of
I
that.
don't know,
Well,
that film is really good. I really enjoyed that film. But yeah.
But, like, I feel like if it was made literally 5 years later, they would try and turn Tetris into, like, a plot point. See
Yeah.
Minecraft,
series or-
Pixels, etc.
Oh, yeah, they would, wouldn't they? At least it wasn't made into
Yeah,
that.
so thank God the biopic got in.
It actually was. It wasn't historically correct, but it was more historically correct than
Yeah, so there was a
You
lot
know.
of exaggerated stuff about like the KGB and things like that, which was not real. There's videos in the description by both YouTubers Think Story and A Game Scout, which both in their ways talk about the inaccuracies and accuracies. If you really want to get into that, I thought the film was very good. I really enjoyed it. Vicky, I think you enjoyed it more than you thought you were going to when I said we're going to watch the Tetris movie.
Well, when Phill sat down and said, "Let's watch the film Tetris," it wasn't what I expected, but it was really good. It was. I wasn't expecting bad, but at the same time, when you're sitting down to watch a film about a game about blocks, it's just amazing the history behind it, and so much was going behind the scenes for such a simple game.
Yeah.
And such an iconic game as well.
Yeah, it's features Taron Egerton as Hank Rogers. It's just about that story of how they got the rights. It's good. It's worth checking out if you like that
got some
kind
really
of
good
historical,
names as well.
Slightly silly, but very good movie.
Because who was the guy who was trying to get the licensing rights from Hank? He's a really famous actor.
Oh,
as
you
well.
talking about the guy that
Seen
played
him in the Marvel
Stein?
movies. Yeah.
Yes, I want to say his name. He's Toby Jones.
Oh, Toby Jones, yeah, good accent.
Yeah.
The guy that was also in the Post Office scandal.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed the Tetris movie, put in the comments your Apple ID and password, and I will watch it.
So anyway, yeah, that's Tetris. Tetris is maybe one of the most simple and effective puzzle games of all time. I still enjoy playing it nowadays, both solo and in the multiplayer modes. I think it has a fascinating history, probably the most interesting background of any of the games we've ever covered. It's amazing how well it works as a concept. If you had one less block, it wouldn't have worked. If you had one more, it'd probably been too complicated. Some of the modern games, their gimmick has been hit and miss, but it's built on a very solid core, which is Tetris is fun.
Yeah.
Official Nintendo magazine ranked Tetris 5th on its list of the 100 best Nintendo games. Game Informer called it the best Game Boy game. PC Magazine included the game on their top 10 best Game Boy games, saying Tetris serves up addictive and challenging gameplay on the go for all ages. Tetris is iconic, what can I say? What do you guys think? Vicky?
So I haven't actually played a lot of Tetris in my life. It's been one of those ones that, say it came with the phone or it came with a game system. I'd play for a little bit and it was always a bit of fun. But what I like about Tetris is the simplicity of it, the history of it, and it's one of those wonderful oddities that so many things that had nothing to do with each other had to go right to make this even a thing. That's what I loved most about the Tetris movie. And that's what I liked most about learning the history of Tetris. It's just so many little things. If one thing hadn't gone right, then we wouldn't even have Tetris as we know it today. And the way that it's influenced the gaming sector has been astounding. Everyone, even if I'm not a big Tetris player myself, everyone knows Tetris. I know Tetris. Like, it is one of those games that are just iconic and it doesn't matter what the system is, or whether you're talking about arcade or handheld or console. It's an iconic game, along with stuff like Pac-Man.
Yeah.
Like, everyone knows Pac-Man. It's just one of those games that is just a staple to gaming history. So, on that note, I think it's amazing.
Nick?
Yeah, what she said. No,
Tag.
Yeah, I think it is a great game, and the simplicity of it is great. And like you said as well, Phil, it's kind of like it's pitch perfect in like its execution and everything. Like the fact that you can get to the bottom row and still just like hit one more spin on it and like slot it into a gap like at the last second. It's a very satisfying game. It's also like it's a good champion, even though it has transcended like consoles and generations and stuff. Like you can still download it on the App Store or on Android or whatever. Like I still think it's quite a good, like, it's an advocate for tactility and for buttons, because like there's nothing quite like it than like mashing those buttons at the last second and stuff. Whereas like it's a bit like Snake in terms of like I kind of hate using touchscreen versions of it. But yeah, no, it's an immensely satisfying game, and yeah, like you say, it's just designed to the perfect execution of what it is, isn't it? And I do want to check out the film.
So, Tetris. Let us know in the comments what you think of Tetris. Do you remember the first system you played Tetris on? Like, do you think it's iconic, or do you not get the hype? Let us know. This is the first episode of Big Nostalgia Season 4. We will be releasing 11 more weekly episodes in the next 11 weeks. So stick around, subscribe, leave a comment. Check out the first 3 seasons, which are on our channel, which cover Nintendo 64 games, GameCube games, and Wii games. And Vicky and I will be here next week to talk about the first ever Mario handheld game, Super Mario Land. What was it like to have the plumber on the go? So, we'll see you then to talk about that game. I've been Phill.
I've been Nick. Don't forget to leave your Apple login in the comments.
And I've been Vicky.
Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Laters.
Professor X himself, Patrick Stewart, is a self-possessed... Let me try that again.
He's self-possessed? Poor Patrick Stewart.